Morning, everyone. Morning. So my name is Andrade. I'm the Impact Director at Groundwork Southcoast. We are an environmental nonprofit based primarily in New Bedford, but also in Fall River. And we work at the intersection of environmental stewardship and transformation, and then youth and community leadership building. So today I'm going to talk about one of our key models, which is called the Resilience District model, which is a way that we convene community partners in order to transform and make some of those small and large wins that Anton was mentioning. So just a little bit of background on Groundwork Southcoast. The triangle on the left is kind of a broad overview of how our work interfaces with everything. So the dark blue on the left of the triangle, so primarily workforce development, which is paid investment in youth and adult environmental justice residences. And that's primarily through Green Team, Green Core, and LRC, which our Green Team is for 14 to 21-year-olds. Green Core is for 18 to 26 young adults workforce. And LRC is our community, as a group of community members who get paid to help us determine what work we want to do in our communities, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The second side of the triangle is engagement. So that's outreach to the community, outreach and engagement to community residents, to partners, and developing them to scale up what we call our ladder of engagement to deepen their leadership and have more investment in their community. And the third piece that ties it all together is our climate and environmental resilience, which is the actual physical transformation of the environment, the trust building that we do with the community to say, we're not just coming in and saying that we're going to change the community, you're going to help us actually make that a reality. And in the middle of all that is equity and leadership cultivation. So like I said, we primarily work in New Bedford and Fall River. And this is a heat map of that we have from Groundwork USA, which is our kind of umbrella organization. And in this map, you can see that Fall River and New Bedford are shaded deeply red compared to the surrounding Bristol County. And what this is showing is that this is a map of heat inequality and heat vulnerability. So you can see literally the deeper the red, the hotter and more vulnerable those communities are. So you see how Fall River and New Bedford are disproportionately environmental justice communities and also disproportionately affected by climate, by heat, and I'll dive into that a little bit more. Here is zoomed in on New Bedford, and it might be hard to see, but there's a black outline kind of in the middle at the top. That's our resilience district that we focus on. But the key for this map is the deeper the pockets of red are the census tracts, and the one that's highlighted there, for example, the average surface temperature in that neighborhood is about 100 degrees. So you say, what does that mean? So all of this data is collected through NASA and through EPA, and it's 5-year satellite imagery. And basically the average that they calculate is that average surface temperature is about 84 degrees. So this census block is seeing on average in the hotter months 15 degree hotter. And then what you do is you look at not just the place, but you look at the people who live there. So you say who lives there. You can see that in that particular census block, and that's not even the highest one. There are some census blocks in that map that are 105 degrees surface temperature. We're seeing populations of 60 to 70% Hispanic or Latino in this neighborhood in particular, and poverty rates that go beyond a third, 33%. So low home ownership, high poverty rates, high disproportionate amount of non-white residents who live there. And then you contrast that with just directly, there's a river right on the buffer of that red on the right. And then the other side of that is a Fairhaven and Acushnet. And you can see the blue, the shades of blue. So you see just across the river, the neighbors of New Bedford and what that looks like. So over there would be a median income of 60 to 70,000 plus. Their tree canopy cover is 20, 30, 40%. In New Bedford, it's 0 to 3%, 3% if they're lucky. So in just a small geographic zone, how much our worlds can change and look different and the history behind that. And then for context also, this is Fall River. So very similarly, you see there's a lot of deeper reds in the center city of Fall River. And we work in the lower section of Fall River. And very similarly, lots of EJ residents. You see that deep shade, it's like a sideways, upside down L right next to it. it's a deep pocket of red, and there's literally a housing development that's right there that's primarily Hispanic and Black residents. So you see these kind of pockets of segregation, which is a word that you don't even think to say in 2024, but it still exists. So given this context in Fall River, and specifically in New Bedford, which we'll be talking about today, how do we bridge the gaps and the inequalities that our residents are facing, not just doing the work and changing the community for them, which can lead to things like gentrification, but how are we involving them in the process to really shape and determine the future outcomes of their communities, which they've historically been disenfranchised from. So to do that, we engage a whole host of partners, some of which you can see here, and I'll go through these in a second. But we have over 70 cross-sector partnerships that we engage with in our work. Chief among them is the City of New Bedford, and chief among those are the City of New Bedford Parks Department. We work very closely with Mary Raposa, who's the director, who has been a champion for Groundwork Southcoast since we launched in 2017. And we also work very closely with the New Bedford Resilient Office, which focuses on environment, energy, and we work very closely with them, as well as the Mayor's Office, who is a big support for the City of New Bedford, and the Department of Public Infrastructure there as well. We also work very closely with our Resilience District Model Initiative with the National Park Service Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program. There's Love the Ave, which is a neighborhood-focused group of community partners that work on Acushnet Ave, which is the main thoroughfare that cuts through the neighborhood that we work in, which is an initiative started by CEDC, the Center for Economic Development Council. WHALE is the Waterfront Area Historic League, which has been a huge advocate for housing rights in the city. When urban renewal and model cities came through New Bedford and just destroyed homes and put in highways, WHALE was created to kind of help intervene and say, no more displacement, we need to make equitable choices for the residents who live here. SERPED, which is our regional planning agency, and then Envision Resilience, which is an initiative that started off of Nantucket that worked in New Bedford and Fairhaven to do a number of environmental resilient projects. And we worked with Northeastern University and their students, which we'll talk about in a second. We engage all those partners, and what we do is we have what we define as a resilience district, a targeted area of the City of New Bedford, which you saw the boundaries before, and I can send out maps later too if you want more details. And in that district, which covers basically a large chunk of the north end of the city, we have something even more targeted called a resilience zone. So it's the purple shade that you see is our resilience district, and what we decide to do is focus on our resilience zone first, which is Riverside Park. If anybody has ever been there in New Bedford, it's a large, beautiful park that was formerly 2 mills, torn down in the 90s, and was turned into a lovely recreational space. And what we do is we work with all of the partners that I mentioned before and the community to determine what projects do you want to see, how can we leverage funding to get those projects going, and then get community involved in those projects to make them really succeed. So the first thing that we did was when we launched in 2017, we had our youth go out in the community and they were picking up trash, beautifying streets, and they said, we don't want to just pick this trash up, we want to give back to our community in some way. So they wanted to focus on food access, which was not part of our original mission, and we adopted it. And what we started right here is a former deck hockey rink, open air, and it had 25 old wooden raised beds on it. Was prone to kind of disruption and destruction from the community. There was this large sentiment, community gardens do not work in our community, you're never going to get one going. And we started there. 3 years later, we turned that into the first fully adoptable space on public property, where it's fully fenced in, and there's now 160 raised beds that are adopted every year by the community. And that was through years of community engagement, listening to residents, getting that buy-in, building that trust. And that is a kind of a key staple site, and I have a photo of it a little bit later. And then we said, what do we do from there? So again, going out to the community, getting their feedback, going door to door, having meetings. And that large green kind of squiggle line that you see there was a project that we did with the City of New Bedford, which was the first ever goatscaping project. So we had goats come in and they ate all the poison ivy and invasives that were along that riverbank. And then our youth followed through with seeding native seedings. So what it did was it opened up the waterfront view. It really helped people connect back to the water and the river, which was cut off because of the invasives, because of other illicit activity. And then there's also some fruit tree plantings that we did. Residents said, we don't want just shade trees. We want trees that I can bring my children to, and we can pick apples off the fruit trees. So we installed some fruit trees around there. So everything you see in the northern half of the park that's green are all projects that we've now completed. And now we're shifting our focus to the southern half of the park, and you see those orange sections there. The large orange rectangle on the left, we are in the process of planting a microforest, so there's going to be 30 to 40 large shade trees there. That part of the park is very open to the sun exposure, so that is not as utilized because it's so hot and people don't want to sit down. So we're going to be doing some shade there. And then the little diamond shape that's right next to it is going to be the first ever migratory salt marsh project that gets installed in the city. And basically, as the water rises on the river and takes over the park as climate change impacts worsen over the years, what basically is going to happen is that salt marsh is going to migrate along with the river. So it's going to create this natural buffer between the park and the rising water, so it still connects residents to the water, but is also adaptable to climate change, and then protecting the actual native environment of the riverfront. So with that model comes some successes. So the photo on the left is a workshop we did with the community, and those are Northeastern students. They did a number of different renderings that we had them partner with to say, here's some opportunities for what could be some big grand designs. Let's bring these to the community and see what they think. And then on the right is an example of a partnership with Love the Ave. This is one of the parks in the neighborhood. And you can see it's packed with people. So working with partners to collaborate to say, how can we reach the most amount of people possible? How are we working together to achieve a common goal? This is a photo of our first main site, our park. So at the top is what it looked like when we took it over. Open air, kind of disheveled, there's boards missing. And then on the bottom, it might be hard to see, but all those blue beds are all fully adopted by the community. You can see the fence line, which we also grow food on the fence line as well that residents can come pick. And residents can drop in and out and get food for free. So it's a way to give back to the community, have an activated space. And that was a project that we couldn't have done without engaging partners from the city and really having that community voice be heard. Some of the other projects that we're doing in our resilience district, we had a defined boundary, and then in 2022, we expanded that boundary to include the neighborhood. This district the highway cuts off New Bedford in half. Previously, that was one neighborhood. So we decided, why don't we connect the neighborhood that's right on the other side of the highway, really try to bridge the communities that historically were connected back together by doing green infrastructure projects around that highway lens. So the park on the left is another community garden that we're working on getting established. It's not fully fenced in yet, but we are working on getting it fenced in. But that garden is also 100% adopted at this point, even though we just launched this year. And then the photo on the right is of our first site at Riverside Park. And what that is showing is all the red and the white that you see, and that's temperature reading. So this is spot data that I go out and I do to back up and justify how these kind of projects are actually making a difference, not just for the community in terms of getting them food and having them a recreation space, but the actual climate impacts that we say that we're going to have are actually happening. So in that white area, the asphalt is reading 126 degrees. This is on like an 86 degree day, and this is surface temperature, so if you touched it, that's how hot it would be. And then you see it starts getting yellow, and then kind of green, and then it starts getting blue. The blue is all of the beds that are adopted by the community that are fully grown in, so this is when the vegetation is kind of full. Those beds are rating 85 degrees if we round up. So that's a 40 degree difference just by having a 34 inch by 34 inch plot. So when you look at the asphalt, and if you did all the math, 160 beds times 34 inch by 34 inch, you calculated the average temperature of each of those, we're probably seeing a 30 to 40 degree overall cooling effect at the site. So we're getting residents that food, we're cooling the space down and we're making it just a more livable place to interact and work in. This is an example of some of the renderings that we worked with the Envision Resilience students. So this is Ashley Boulevard, which is another main thoroughfare. Currently, there are virtually no bus shelters on our main thoroughfares in that neighborhood. So designing a place where residents can sit and wait for public transportation. And the other main project that we're working on is, you see the trees and the kind of landscaping. There's a lot of asphalt in this neighborhood, as you saw on the heat map. So how do we cool those things down further, like we did at Riverside Park? And it's by tearing up the asphalt and installing green infrastructure projects. So that is a project that came directly from the LRC that I mentioned before, is our group of residents who inform us. It's a specific group per resilience district. They inform us what they want to do, and a green infrastructure walking route through the neighborhood was their first main project, and that's where we engaged the Envision Resilience students to do the design work. And our board for our organization, as well as the steering committee of partners that we have, actually agreed and signed off to say, we are going to adopt and follow the will and the direction of the residents of this resilience district, and have that be our main goal and driving forward each year. So really centering those voices and then proving and demonstrating that the work will move forward, and we're not just talking the talk, but we're also walking the walk. And then our next step, so we have our resilience district in New Bedford, it's very solid. Our next step is getting one going in Fall River. So as mentioned before, Cook Pond, which is a large pond, and in that red is kind of the area that we're eyeing. So Cook Pond would be our resilience zone, similar to how Riverside Park is in New Bedford. And then beyond that, what other opportunities exist? And that's where that partner engagement comes in, because who is active in this neighborhood? Who do we need to bring to the table? How do we engage residents in this neighborhood, especially the environmental justice residents? And how do we get them to say what parks are or aren't you using? What streets are walkable, what streets are not? How do we connect all of the green infrastructure and environmental projects that we're going to do into kind of one cohesive element where everyone can enjoy it together? And at Cook Pond, there's a trail system that's not very utilized, which is right next to a school and a housing development, and most people don't know about it. So how do we bring environmental justice residents who are cut off from all these things historically to these places so they can enjoy it too, like they should? So with that, thank you. And if you have any questions or comments? Yeah.
Curious about the timeline from the time that the garden bed project, so you identified that space and then you showed us the end result. And what was the timeline?
So we've been an organization for just over 7 years. We initially took over the site in 2017. It took a couple of years to getting the fence alone was a donation that we got, and it's a pretty large space. It's larger than this tent, plus maybe a little bit more. So even just the fence cost $27,000. So getting that donation, which was a donation from the American Fence Association, which we were really lucky to get. Ordering all the beds, so all the infrastructure that you see on the bottom was all funded through the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. So we get that fund, we apply and we get that funding usually every year to kind of grow and expand our food access work. And then I would say it was the winter of 2020 that the fence went up. And then obviously we were in the pandemic, so the engagement didn't happen right away. But in the spring of 2021 is really when we noticed people are saying, oh, there's something here now. This was nothing before. What's going on? So we noticed immediately that just by closing it off and making it appear or feel safer, even if it was or wasn't, people wanted to engage with it. And we had in 2021, we had about 5 gardeners that kind of were the brave souls who took over and said, we're going to try this out. And then once they said, oh, I was able to garden, nothing got taken. I'm growing great produce. We have one gardener who was our first ever one. There's a housing, an elderly housing at the end of that road. And she literally still to this day, she's the first one out there every year, and she brings carts full. She wheels it down and she harvests all her produce, and she grows watermelons that are like this big. She's growing 300 pounds of food every year by herself. And she wheels it down, and she said, the residents, my neighbors, are waiting for this food when it comes back. So it's about that power, having that power and giving that power and agency just to one resident, never mind a whole community and a whole neighborhood. So by 2021, we saw that momentum start to pick up, and by 2022 and every year since, the garden has been fully adopted. So now we're kind of just in the stages of really maintaining and evolving that site. Our green team also grows food there that they give out in addition to the community. And now we're looking really at that south end of the park to say, how do we activate this even further?
So that was a long process that required commitment, kind of perseverance. Did you have any challenges internally with like turnover in your staffing or volunteers? Like how did you make sure that the project didn't fall by the wayside, that you were consistent with it?
Some of the challenges that we initially faced, like I mentioned, was the kind of just general attitude, you're never going to get this to work. And that came from people in the municipality. It came from the community in general. Just that apathy said, this is New Bedford, nothing's ever going to work here, you can't do anything. So it is that perseverance in saying our community and our youth want this. We are going to just keep going and keep going until we do. So it's meetings after meetings after meetings, figuring out designs, trial and error, making sure that it doesn't work. We didn't have any dedicated professional gardeners on our staff. It was me and my executive director at the time when we launched this. And now we went from a staff of 2 to now we're a staff of 6, and we're continuously growing. So staff does turn over, and it's about bringing people in who want to have that investment in the community and are bought into that. And the real success of this is the partnerships with the city and the partnerships that we highlighted. So if it wasn't for having a strong connection with the Parks Department, we would probably be behind the ball on this than we currently are. So the Parks Department is a massive supporter saying, Groundwork saying they're going to do this, I know that they can. We believe in them and we support them, and we're going to push forward. And it's really that. So we meet every other month with our partnership group, which is our steering committee for the Resilience District. And it's about like what updates, what's happening in the park, what else is going on, what are we applying for together, what can we help piece together. And it's just having that open line of communication. And we've been really lucky. There hasn't been any vandalism. We've had a couple people hop the fence, but nothing really major. I think it's when people see it's, even though it takes a lot of time, they said, oh, they're not going away. They're still here. They haven't backed out yet. Maybe there is something here. So it's about that perseverance to just keep going, even if there might be a challenge or a hiccup along the way.
In the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about how you guys have like paid workforce development with youth. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that, and maybe like how you started that? How are you engaging with these young adults?
Yeah. So the Groundwork model, so we are a part of a large national network. There are Groundwork trusts all over the country. There's 3 in Mass. It's us, Somerville, and then Lawrence, which was one of the initial Groundwork trusts that started in 99 or 98, I believe. We launched in 2017. We were the first 2-city model. And that initial funding kicks off from the National Park Service and from EPA. And part of that initial kind of seed funding that they give you before they send you off on your own is that you have to have what's called a green team workforce component. So historically, that's looked like we were 16 to 20 years old, and then COVID kind of changed what workforce looks like. So we dropped, we said, 16, 17-year-olds now need to get full-time jobs to help support their family. Now we're gonna bump the age down to 14. So now we do 14 to 21 that are in school, are part of our green team youth. During the summertime, they work 15 to 20 hours. During the school year, they work about 12 hours after school. So it's a year-round program. And yeah, they've historically been the ones who are helping to do that work. They can't use power tools and all that, but they're the ones that are doing our community engagement projects. So they're going door to door, and then they're also there on site at the field. And that's been a program that's never going to go away for us. And it's paid. It's all paid work. We do have volunteer events and we do work with volunteers, but primarily the green team is our focus. And we're in the process of launching a green core, which is 18 to 26 young adults out of school. And that's going to be, what we realized is it's hard to do those larger environmental projects as we're scaling up as an organization without when your youth are getting to you at 4 o'clock after school, and then especially coming up, its daylight is ending in an hour. So for safety purposes. So we're launching that Green Core, which is another kind of model from the Groundwork USA network. And that'll be intensive hands-on projects, getting OSHA training, using power tools, and really helping us respond to some of those things that you see, like being able to plant more trees, remove asphalt, do larger green infrastructure projects, and respond to that. And then we also pay the residents for their time. So that resident group that I mentioned, that's all paid. So they get paid to show up to meetings, they get paid to talk about the work that they're helping to lead and do. So we believe that if you're doing any work for us or otherwise, you should be paid for it. Any other questions?
Yeah, how do you identify the resident groups?
Yeah, so we have an engagement and outreach team. So it's really going door to door. The first group that we had was primarily our community gardeners. So kind of similar to our first green team. They said, how do we are growing our food. I want to be a part of something bigger. So it's about helping to set not just the hands-on work, but helping to set that strategy. So we had that for our first cohort. The cohort we have now is part alumni who were part of our green team. And then we have a couple of community gardeners. There's one gentleman who is basically taking care of that whole site on the left. So we've adapted the program a little bit. So his focus is, I'm going to be the steward for this property. Sometimes the grass doesn't get cut, so he's going out there in the sweltering heat. He's cutting the grass himself. He's making sure that no one's messing with the beds. So we said, let's get you paid for this time, because what you're doing is you're gardening, but it's also a climate resilience project. You are also helping this space become a more resilient and active space for the community. So we're going to pay you for that time because you're helping us build that resilience in your neighborhood. So it's about that engagement, talking to people. And when you're out there, people tend to come up to you. But it is really, you have to go door to door. You have to do that legwork to really connect with people, because everyone's busy, right? Prices are soaring. So getting a community meeting is sometimes hard because it doesn't work for everybody because you're working 2 to 3 jobs. So it's really meeting the residents where they're at and getting them out in the field and saying, hey, here's all the things that you can join us in. Come be a part of this too and help change your community.
Do you work through the councils on aging at all?
Because we have such a youth focus, we haven't directly worked with them specifically in New Bedford. I've worked with them in the past in my previous roles, but it is an opportunity. Like, we do see a lot of, especially at the community gardens, a lot of older adults do tend to participate in the gardening piece of it. So it's not something that we've explicitly worked on, but we were open to connection.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating, and I think it's just this definite trend within the Council on Aging network now to sort of, you made a great point about the power that comes with, sort of the empowerment that comes along with, people having these opportunities, but I think it also gives a lot of purpose for older adults. And I think, this sort of, I know some of the projects that our agency has helped fund last year, I mean, there were intergenerational components where it was older adults working, again, whether it was the students from the local high school coming in and putting in the raised beds, and then the older adults in the senior center, helping to grow the produce, and then being able to use that to produce the meals, within the senior center, or, give older adults fresh produce to bring home. I feel like there's something, it's a sense of ownership that people have in the process, and it's helping them in their aging journey to stay engaged and have purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, at our first site, we kind of got that feedback. So those beds in particular are extremely low to the ground. So we said, it's not fully accessible, so why don't we so I think it was our second year, we were able to purchase elevator raised beds that they're wheelchair accessible and they're easier for our older adult gardeners to come in and participate. And they water and they have that full agency and access to, live their lives and really connect back, especially for the garden spaces, because New Bedford is such a diverse community. There's a lot of older adults who have emigrated here, and a lot from Cape Verde, from Guatemala, from Honduras, and back at their homes, they were able to just garden anywhere. And gardening and farming are traditional land practices that they were connected to, that then they came to America and were disenfranchised from because our communities weren't designed that way. So this is a way for them to also re-engage and put their hands back into the earth and feel like they're connected to their traditional roots.
I want to second that, idea of the intergenerational connection. I think that's so powerful. And related to what you just said, some of the younger people could learn about some of the produce that their grandmothers grew in their yard, right? I mean, there's just the cultural aspect of it, of keeping those stories and those recipes and those foods alive. There's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, that's a great point. At our first site, So a large portion of the site is adopted by a group of Guatemalan and Honduran women, and they call themselves Mujeres Victoriosas. And they were actually able to teach our green team. I think our green team was harvesting, it's a native to Guatemala, it's called chiplin. And the green team said, "What is that? Like, that just looks like leaves." And the women were like, "No, it's not just leaves, it's produce that we eat." And same thing with squash. So the green team was harvesting the squash, and then one of the women said, "You can eat the leaves too." So it's that cross-cultural and that culturally relevant food as well. That's really a big driving point to get people connected to. And we have a large Cape Verdean community as well that also gardens. Nothing else? I'll be around for a little bit, and I have some business cards and everything too, so if you want to connect more, we can always do that, and I can give a bit deeper presentation. If you want to see more of the map that we have, it's interactive. I just had photos of the slides, so yeah, any questions further, just let me know. Great, thank you.